On this week's episode of the Going Commando podcast, we break down the Commanders' big win down in Houston. We get fans ready to continue the win streak against Atlanta. We talk London Fletcher being a semifinalist for the Hall of Fame, the new Sean Taylor statue set to be put up at FedEx Field, and much more. So stick around and let's get the show started. Welcome to Going Commando, a Washington Commanders podcast.
Hello and welcome to the Going Commando podcast. I am your host, Tom, here with my co-hosts, Chris and Clark. How you boys feeling coming off this big win against the Texans? I mean, it's rare that we see a win like this from the Commanders, and especially, when I heard that we were up 14-0 at one point, I was shocked.
Yeah, very, very pleased with the win. It was a game that we should win and needed to win, and we did so pretty handily. Almost a 20-point lead if it wasn't for that kind of late, kind of garbage time Davis Mills touchdown. Defense played lights out, which has been a great trend, and really pleased with that performance. And then a lot of good out of the offense as well. It was a very clean game, not too sloppy, only a couple negatives overall, I'd say. So very, very great showing. Again, it was against a team that is, one of the more struggling teams overall in the NFL. So maybe it wasn't necessarily a test of true metal on metal for this team, but nonetheless, a game we needed to win, and we went out and executed.
I was very pleased that the game was not very close. We were kind of in control for the majority of the game, and I feel like often that's not really the case with this team. Just although that it is a inferior opponent, with this team, we all know that you can never really be so sure. So I was very great to see them kind of take control of the game and in a sense dominate pretty much the entire way through. One thing of note that I will say is that NRG Stadium in Houston, from the looks of it, looked like there was quite a few Commanders fans in the stadium today. Ron Rivera, when asked about it, estimated that there was roughly at least 10,000 Commanders fans there. They showed a clip of the screen after Kendall Fuller's pick six, and it was just a flood of red. So that was pretty cool to see. I guess we travel pretty well down there in Houston, or maybe they don't have anybody coming to their games either. But nonetheless, it was just a very good win to have. And I think that, a lot of things are currently trending in the right direction.
Well, one thing that's trending in the right direction that I think we do need to touch on is, Chris, you called out Logan Thomas last week, and he ends up being our leading receiver on the team. Now, obviously, that might not mean so much when you don't have a passing touchdown in the entire game, but he's still a guy that I think, was looking very good and was almost a safety valve at times. So I'm wondering how you would react to his great game this week.
Yeah, it was a solid game out of Logan, 5 for 65. It was good to, have a tight end that we can actually kind of throw to and rely on as part of, our offense, which we really have been kind of just lacking this season out of the whole group just due to injury and just the type of players that we have. So super pleased with that. Again, I thought it was a really solid game, all around. This was probably the most confident I've felt kind of going into the second half of a game, for this team all season long. A really cool stat that that I thought was amazing. The defense held the Texans to 5 offensive yards total for the first half of this game, which was the fewest. It set a record for the fewest offensive yards gained in the first half in Texans franchise history. So history was made. last Sunday, and we were on the right side of it, for once. So it was good to see that. Clark, you mentioned the fans. I noticed that as well. Really, really warming and fun to actually see our fans taking over, an opposing stadium for once, since, historically we're kind of the brunt end of the stick there when it comes to folks coming into our house and kind of taking over. So super pleased with that. That was super awesome to see.
And one thing that I think we really do need to touch on is the running game once again coming up big for us on offense. I mean, you see Antonio Gibson leading the yardage and the carries for the first time in quite a while, honestly. I mean, it felt like Brian Robinson was the bell cow back for a while, and obviously it was even carry split with one or two going either way. And it's hard to say that either of them were necessarily better than Curtis Samuel, and Curtis Samuel had that really amazing jet sweep touchdown that just, kind of secured our lead and made us feel a lot more comfortable in it. But who do you guys really think came out on top on that game? I really think, Antonio Gibson has been looking great, but when you don't score a touchdown from either running back, it's kind of hard to say that they played extremely well.
I was really pleased watching Brian Robinson run the football. There were several plays where, I mean, it just looked like the guy was a man amongst boys running through the linebackers and secondary of the Texans. I mean, there's a few times where he just refused to go down on first contact. He was kind of just a bowling ball out there. So that's the kind of player that we were expecting to see. He's been a guy that's gotten a lot of carries. He's gotten decent stat lines, but at some points I felt that something was lacking there, but he really put it all together. And again, let's not pretend like Houston is some insane stout defensive front, but at the same time, I mean, it's really encouraging to see this guy who, as we know, battled some adversity this year, come back and just run like an absolute menace. So I was really pleased with Brian Robinson.
Yeah, I saw, I was pleased with that, and I saw really physical running out of both, Gibbington and B Rob for us there. Gibson, I do still think that and contend that Gibson is the more dynamic player out of the two. I mean, he's also a threat in the passing game and receiving game rather. 3 for 31 on the day, and I know no touchdowns necessarily from either of them specifically, but again, super pleased with that. Really like what I've been seeing with B Rob kind of coming back into kind of full strength. Now that he's some weeks and time removed from that injury. Wide receiver runs, Curtis Samuel on the score, but also incorporating Dotson and Terry into the game. So I on wide receiver runs, I really like how they're giving players a chance to, our playmakers, some of our best players on the offense, of course, is in that receiving core. They're giving them a chance to kind of make plays on the fly and get those playmakers out in space. So I really like that. Terry, very reliable again, going 4 for 55, coming up with some clutch catches. And then again, I think also, to mention for this offense, Joey Sly having continued success, 3 for 3 on the day for us as well. So really pleased to see some consistency out of the kicker position as well. Overall, this offense had nearly 10 more minutes of possession time than the Texans did in this game. And I think, again, if we can continue to keep that trend up with long drives that diminish the opposing team's ability to get their offense on the field, we're going to continue to see success if we're playing like this.
And this might sound a little bit backwards, but I actually think that, since Heineke has been inserted back into this offense, that Scott Turner has begun to be a bit more creative, which wouldn't make sense, right? You're supposed to, this is a guy that you're trying to replace all off season. You bring in Carson Wentz, who's supposed to be like a gunslinger, supposed to be a guy you can throw the ball down the field with. But now that you insert Heineke, he's got a level of familiarity with the offense. You're seeing more of these kind of jet sweeps. You're seeing more and more players get touches. And it seems that they've been keeping defenses on their heels thus far in this 5-game stretch where we've seen Heineke as the starter. So I do compliment Scott Turner. He's gotten some flack from us on this podcast, but I think in recent weeks, especially now with Heineke, who's, I guess, he's a little bit more one-dimensional. I mean, he in terms of his passing game, he's a little bit more one-dimensional. He's not, he can't really sling the ball quite as far down the field as Wentz might be able to, but the offense just seems to be running a little bit differently with him, and it's nice to see.
Let's slow down here on the Heineke talk. And I brought this up before the podcast, but there is a pretty good stat coming out in the past few days about how Taylor Heineke has 0 touchdown passes in the past 2 games, and we still have a record of 2-0 through those 2 games. Now, I'm not Taylor Heineke, but if I was, I would be a little embarrassed about that. I mean, that's almost kind of a shot across the bow, right? I mean, that's people are talking about him as if he's this guy that is not producing almost. And I think we can all agree he's doing a lot of good stuff on the field, but he isn't producing those passing touchdowns. And is that worrying? Kind of. Now, obviously, you like the wins, but does that come from his play? No, I don't think so. That's the team playing well, and I wouldn't necessarily consider his play to be one of the best on the team. So, what are we really doing with this guy?
Well, that's kind of what I just said. Like they're not asking him to do as much in this offense. We're relying more on our talented skill players to get the job done, and Heineke to kind of game manage. And he'll make a throw here or there. He's also willing to give his guys a shot. Like what it seems that him and Terry just have great chemistry together. Even if it's an underthrown ball that he's just tossing up to Terry on a prayer. But I don't think it really matters that his touchdown, passing touchdown numbers or whatnot, might not be at the level of Wentz. Like Wentz might give you some touchdown passes. He's also going to give you some pretty bad, errors throughout the game. So I just don't think that they're necessarily asking that out of Heineke.
Yeah, I mean, I think the reason you see Heineke as the starter today and for the foreseeable future is because he gets wins, and that's the statistical category that matters most, right? I mean, I don't think, yes, I would love to see, a couple passing touchdowns here and there, and he has done so. I know that the last 2 games is not representative of that. But he gets the most out of this team, and I think it's quite obvious that the players rally around him. He's got that X factor, that underdog, that grittiness that really resonates with the players in this team. And I would even argue he's a little bit more dynamic than Wentz in the sense that he's able to do more. He's able to extend plays. Yes, the arm strength is perhaps not as great as what Wentz has, but other than that, I honestly feel like Heineke is superior in nearly every other category, at least from what I've been able to see this this year so far. When comparing the two, again, no knock on Wentz. I think he's probably got a little short end of the stick here with the injury and would have had at least a few more games maybe to showcase what he's capable of. Or not capable of before getting yanked or something like that. But overall, pleased with the way Heineke's playing, and I think that he's earned the job, for the time being and for the future, at least for this season.
But well, that's interesting that you say that, because speaking of the future, this is what I'm talking about. When you have just a game manager guy whose marginal skills get you across the goal line about 50% of the time, according to our win percentage, I mean, now we are above 500, which is kind of weird to say as a Commanders fan. I mean, you don't expect that until maybe the end of the season when you start winning some meaningless games. But when you're looking at a forward, outlook for this team, and you see Heineke in the picture, I mean, like as a fan, I'm scared by that. I think that we really do need to find a guy who has more than marginal talent. I mean, that's not necessarily a knock on Heineke. Having marginal talent in the NFL is to be an extremely talented guy. Who just maybe doesn't have that X factor. And I think that's something that we're going to need, especially if we're going to look at a playoff spot, which we did not secure because the Cardinals did not beat the 49ers in Mexico. But we are looking forward to one possibly in the future should the games play out right for us. I mean, do we really trust Heineke in a playoff picture in the future?
He's 4-1 though in the games that he started. Carson Wentz is 2-4. So obviously he's a little bit above 500 in the win category this year. He gets it done. So I mean, I agree. He has his flaws, and he's definitely not perfect, but he gets wins. Much more so than Wentz has proven the ability to.
Well, the issue here, with talking about is Wentz the quarterback of the future? Are you comfortable with him in the playoffs and whatnot? Yes, is there quarterback out there that for our team that is more talented and would be more beneficial to a creating a dominant offense here in Washington, of course. But this roster seems to be in a position where in I don't want to say win now, but it seems that our roster is built to win games, and we're currently doing so. So we're not really putting ourselves in a position to, get like a young franchise guy through the draft at a high spot. And that's where the kind of continual quarterback carousel, kind of finds itself that we've seen the past few years. So if we're winning games with the guy, if he takes us to the playoffs, I don't see why you don't try it again. But again, that is we're far from making the playoffs. We're in uncharted territory having a winning record now, but I also don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves because we all have seen this story and, we all know what can happen.
Yeah, that definitely is a fun fantasy scenario, Clark, to think about. I mean, how can you really not move forward with a guy if he comes in and kind of turns around a team that at one point was 1-4, under a different starter, and then here you are, he comes in, fires off a whole stretch of wins for us and somehow, earns a playoff berth. I mean, that would be pretty incredible. But again, I agree with you. Let's not get ahead of ourselves here. But we've talked a lot about the offense. How about that defense? I mean, clearly, if we're talking so much about how the offense was able to put, a good formula on the table, the defense is, again, what really won us this game. They played lights out, and it starts right with that Fuller pick six right off the bat, gain momentum right at the beginning of the game. There's a lot more to talk about in terms of the defense as well. I mean, first off, like high level thoughts on the play and things that you noticed.
Yeah, I mean, the obvious point out here is that Kendall Fuller had that amazing pick to start the game for us. Really, took the wind out of their sails quite early, and I mean quite early. It was a big momentum swing, and honestly, I think we carried it really well in the offense, proceeding after that event,
Agreed.
and especially when you look at the run game. I mean, I was worried about the passing offense in this game because of Derek Stingley Jr. being such a high pick and Taylor Heineke having a proclivity for throwing interceptions. But it turned out to just be a really well thought out game, as we talked about earlier. And then that defense really, and I mean really, found ways to stop them. I mean, you didn't see a point put up until the second half, which is almost like outrageous to consider because I can just remember years of Commanders teams where the first point on the board was the opponent's points, and then we would always have to fight back and we'd find our way back in. But this defense, man, I mean, Kendall Fuller stepped up. The Montez Sweat sack early on in the game was one really, shining moment of our defense. I really thought it was great that he was able to rebound from having a sackless week last week. And then you have two from Jonathan Allen. I mean, that is when you have a two sack game out of a defensive tackle, that's when you know that you have talent because defensive tackles generally thought of being run stoppers, guys that when the running back tries to hit, the one or the three hole, or maybe even the five if they really go outside and or they play a specific technique. To see a defensive tackle getting sacks is really just, an abnormality, especially when it's in multiples. So great to see that happening on the defensive line.
Yeah, I mean, it was quite frankly a sack parade. Allen with two, Sweat with two as well, Payne with one. Super solid play from our edge depth as well. I thought, with Hill, I've gotten on Hill before, but I thought he looked really good. James Smith-Williams as well, both generated pressure and recorded tackles for loss. We held the Texans to just 21 rushing yards for the entire game. So I mean, that just speaks volumes to what the defense, especially that front four, was able to do. I thought the secondary again played pretty well. Obviously, we mentioned the Fuller pick six. You also have the Derek Forrest interception that was caused by the play by St. Juice to kind of bat that ball away, tip it up in the air. Really great heads up play by Defoe to grab that and stay in bounds. He's been looking great. Going off of that, we saw some work of Bobby McCain actually in the slot. And I actually really thought it was a good formula because it allows not only Bobby to stay on the field, it allows Cam Curl to stay on the field, but it also allows Derek Forrest to be on the field kind of in tandem with Cam Curl holding back the safety spots kind of there. So that could be a really good formula for us going forward. Maybe Bobby McCain can be our kind of Buffalo nickel slot or slot kind of guy in some packages. So that was cool to see. Um, Again, very very pleased overall with how they were playing. Only a couple negatives on my on my list here of what I thought could be better. Obviously, I think we're still missing Cole Holcomb here. We have John Bostic, who's been filling in the last several games in place of the injured Cole Holcomb. He's slow and bad in coverage, and we did see that exposed in this Texans games, particularly on times where he was having to cover Brandon Cooks. He had a couple nice grabs that were, at the vein of Bostic there. Also, I had to call out John Ridgway, that this guy just seems to be making dumb penalties and committing dumb penalties on a weekly basis. Week or two prior, it was the blowing up the center or the long snapper rather on the field goal, which really was a crucial error for us. And then here he basically pulls a move out of the WWE and suplexes Damian Pierce from the top of his head down onto the ground on a very unnecessary roughing kind of play after the whistle was called. I don't really understand why he would do that. It's really a penalty that I don't think any other player on our team is going to be committing. So I would be comfortable with replacing him and getting him out of the lineup. It's just too many egregious, stupid penalties that he's been, the culprit in. But overall, again, like I said, this defense won us this game, and we're going to need to continue to rely on them heavily if we want to, continue to get dubs down the stretch here.
Well, luckily, I think John Ridgway's snap count will start to go a little bit down because Chase Young, it looks like finally is going to be making his return. He was activated to the 53-man roster yesterday. In our next game against the Falcons, he's likely to be on a snap count just due to him being out for so long, but he has finally been activated. So I think your dreams of not seeing John Ridgway may come true. And I also before we transition here, I also wanted to shout out that Derek Forrest interception. You did a good job highlighting it there when talking about the defense. That was really just a great play. I mean, we aren't talking about it enough. The level of concentration he had to still stay in bounds while kind of making that diving play. I've really, really been impressed with Derek Forrest. He already has 3 interceptions thus far in the season. So he is turning out to be a really great player for us.
Yeah, that's a great point, Clark. And it's important to talk about Derek Forrest looking ahead because this is a Falcons team that I think we could see throw the ball quite a bit, considering rookie Drake London has not had that great of a season. And being a high draft pick, you kind of expect more out of him.
Well, the Falcons are a team that throw the ball maybe 20 times a game, and it's really an injustice to Drake London, who is a great player and a great talent. But they're primarily a team that runs the football. They have Marcus Mariota in at QB. There's report this week that if they are eliminated from playoff contention eventually, they might switch to Desmond Ridder, who might give them more of a threat in the passing game. But when looking at this Falcons team, their strength is the run. They have Algier back there, Mariota runs, and of course Cordero Patterson has been one of the best kind of X factor players, for a long time now in the league. He actually had a kick return touchdown last week, which ended up breaking the all-time record for kick return touchdowns in NFL history. So, he's always a guy that you have to watch out for. But knowing the strengths of our defense, it could be a decent matchup. But at the same time, I feel like the Falcons are kind of one of those teams that can kind of surprise you on a week-to-week basis. So what do you guys think?
I think it's also important to note that they'll be without Kyle Pitts. And I know there's been some mixed reviews on his effectiveness this year after a 1,000-yard rookie season last year. And I think some of that is attributed to him just being more of an overall tight end for them. in terms of blocking, doing other things outside of being just kind of a glorified receiver there. But they'll be without him this game, and that's a huge plus for us. Of course, never like to see anyone get injured like that, and especially hopefully not a serious injury. Hopefully it is just a sprain. I haven't seen the latest reports on that yet, but that's a huge plus for us. He's a guy that can create mismatch nightmares for defenses, especially if we don't have Holcomb back by this next game. I mean, imagine Kyle Pitts up against John Bostic. That's something you really don't want to see. So, I guess happy that we don't have to deal with that, this Sunday against the Falcons. But yeah, I think this is another game where we really can't, take lightly. I know we beat this team last year that is largely the same, with a couple changes, notably at QB. But overall, definitely a game we need to win, and a game that we need to hammer home, continue this winning streak, and really not take lightly.
Well, it's also important to note that the cornerback spot for the Falcons, AJ Terrell, he was a very high draft pick, had been playing exceedingly well. He had been questionable all of last week. He will be facing Scary Terry if he is healthy. And that is really, if he is injured, I think that Scary Terry might be, breaking his ankles, getting upfield for maybe 200 yards, quite honestly, with Taylor Heineke just slinging that ball to him. So I think we see the passing game of the Commanders here playing a big role. Obviously, Clark, you make a great point about a running game here. Marcus Mariota being a first-year quarterback in this offense, his biggest asset since he's been in the league has been his legs. I think his arm has kind of been, moderate to great at times, and I think especially with this defensive front, you're going to see him using his legs a lot. And hopefully, I think we can get maybe 4 or 5 sacks out of this guy if we really just put the pressure on him.
He is a more mobile QB, as you mentioned, Tom. So we'll really look to that defensive front again this week. Just going over the guy's stats, he's only thrown for 200 plus yards 3 times. So this is really not a passing offense, which lends well, to the strength of our defense. Kyle Pitts being out is certainly unfortunate for them, but like you said, I don't think the season he's having is an indictment on the guy, but just rather kind of the offense that they run and their the limitations that Marcus Mariota gives them while playing at QB. So I am confident heading into this game. I think this is a game that we are capable of winning, but I do have a little bit of a sense of there's a little bit of uneasiness here. I mean, I feel like the Falcons could pull this off. They beat the 49ers 28-14 several weeks back, which was very unexpected and just a really great win for them. So this is a team that's capable of beating good teams and playing in games with good teams. So I wouldn't be so sure.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I mean, I think that this is a team that a lot of folks are kind of writing off. I mean, they're 5-6. That's only 8 game back from us, if you think about it. And they're kind of written off as a team that's much, in a worse spot than us, but by many. And that may or may not be true. But Marcus Mariota, a guy you got to watch out for. They beat the Bears last week. Justin Fields has been looking really good this most recent stretch of the season. So they beat a good team. In my opinion, or at least was able to keep a good offense at bay, rather. Maybe not a good defense for the Bears, but he's a guy that, can score with his arm and score, with his feet. So we've been able to contain, quarterbacks like that. Great example is Jalen Hurts, and being able to still find ways to win against guys like that. So again, going to be leaning heavily on the defense to do their job in this one. But I agree, Clark. I don't think this is a game that we need to be looking past. This is a game that it could very easily fall our way or not.
And I think one position that we really should look at in terms of falling our way or not is the kicking position, as we will have a matchup for the ages between the most buff kicker in the league in Joey Sly against Younghoe Koo, I believe he is the first Korean American kicker in the NFL, and he is an absolute bomber. He hits all types of kicks. It doesn't matter what hash he's on. So I think this will be a really interesting kicking matchup for those who are interested in the field.
That's a good point, Tom. It was also playing in a dome in Atlanta, so these guys should theoretically be able to just bomb it. Um, don't have to worry about the elements or anything like that.
Good for
So
us.
yeah, Joey Sly's been on target recently. 3 for 3 last game, 4 for 4 the game before. So um, and really people don't talk about it enough, but having a kicker that's consistent, especially if you want to be a good playoff team, is just very crucial. And we've seen time and time again good teams in the playoffs kind of thwarted by kicking woes. Obviously the Bears a few years ago, the Vikings several years ago with Blair Walsh. So having that consistency at that position is more important than people realize. In other news surrounding this Washington Commanders franchise, it was announced today the semifinalists for the Pro Football Hall of Fame class of 2023, and London Fletcher made his first appearance on that list. He's been eligible for a few years now, but London Fletcher made his first appearance on the Pro Football Hall of Fame semifinalist list, which was just really great to see. I mean, we all love, the Iron Man. He was with us for a number of years. And to play that many games in a row at the linebacker position is certainly no easy feat. And I think, while his stats are great, there's other players that obviously like Ray Lewis you can compare him to has better stats, but I think that this guy, just based off longevity alone and the fact that he did it at a high level for that long, should be a Hall of Famer.
I agree. I mean, I think his stats are actually very similar to a lot of guys that are already in the Hall of Fame as well. And, maybe he's just a little bit less of a flashy, less of a vocal kind of guy, more of a lead by example kind of guy. And I think that's something that we saw, good old Fletch Dog do, year in and year out for us. The durability is kind of it's not really a stat. It's more of a trait that I think you also have to take into consideration when thinking about the greatest players of all time. How reliable are they? How durable are they? How available are they week in and week out in a game where, injuries are so common? So I totally agree. Hope our boy, gets the nod there. Would love to see that. Absolutely.
Yeah, and one of the things that I really think about when you bring up London Fletcher is that, do you guys remember that old commercial that used to be on TV where it talked about how fast London Fletcher was able to get to the quarterback? And it was really, I think it was like something like 3 seconds or 3.5 seconds. And it was a great commercial, and it was something that as a kid I remember kind of like idolizing. He was this really great linebacker, and it harkens back to those days of Arakpo being on the team and just how amazing those linebacking cores were, and to see his name make it to the semifinalists. I mean, I really do hope that he gets in. And that's speaking as a fan who recognizes the fact that he started out in St. Louis for so many years. Now I'm extremely happy to see him, but I'm just hoping that he does make it past the semifinal, get to the finalist, and make it in.
So going off that, I do have a trivia question for you guys in relation to the Hall of Fame. So I don't think that it's a great shot that he makes it this year, but still seeing his name appear in the semifinalists means that they're talking about him, and means that eventually one day he very well could find himself in the Pro Football Hall of Fame. But can either of you tell me who the last player from this franchise to be inducted into the Pro Football Hall of Fame was? Who was most
Is,
recently added?
is it Daryl Green?
It is not Darrell Green.
Hmm.
It is not Dale Green. Dale Green was in 2008.
Riggins.
Riggins is not correct either. Riggins, uh,
Weirdly enough, would this happen to be Mark Mosley by any chance?
it is not Mark Mosley. Mark Mosley is not in the Hall of Fame. Riggins was inducted in 92, so he's actually been in the Hall of Fame for quite some time.
I
Any
actually
other
think I know.
last?
You know what my first guess was going to be though. Before I said, I was going to say Chris Hanburger.
That is a great guess, but it's unfortunately not
Oh,
correct.
jeez. Because I remember them,
He,
he was like a delayed one that they got, because he played for us, I believe, in the
yep,
60s. And I know that he was a guy that they didn't really kind of give the accolade to until, much more recently.
he played in the 60s and 70s for us. He was inducted in 2011.
Mm.
Now, any last guesses, guys?
Unless Champ Bailey somehow made it in and I just forgot.
I think he did. So that actually might be it.
That would be the correct answer. Champ Bailey, who played for us
Right.
from 99 to 03, is the latest addition. He was inducted in 2019 to the
Was
Pro
he
Football
truly
Hall of
a
Fame.
Redskin though?
So technically that counts. I know it might have been a little bit of a trick question because he spent the
He
majority
was
of his
drafted
career.
here.
He spent the majority of his career in Denver, of course,
Right.
but it does count. Before that, you have Bobby Beathard, who was the general manager for a very long time. He
Mm-hmm.
was inducted in 2018. But for a player that spent the majority of his career here, you do actually go back to Chris Hamburger in 2011 as the latest addition to the Hall of Fame. He played from 1965 to 1978 in Washington, was inducted in 2011.
Absolutely. And here's to hoping our boy London, makes it in. But in other, I guess, off the field football news, Sean Taylor getting his own statue erected. I believe that they're revealing it at this Sunday's game. And I'm curious to hear your guys' thoughts on this. And it almost seems like a redo at an attempt to honor Sean Taylor. I mean, obviously, Sean, we all love and admire and respect Sean Taylor, one of the greatest, defensive players that this franchise has seen. And obviously, a life cut way too short, and a legacy cut way too short. I think one of the most common pastimes and conversations that Redskins and Commanders fans today have is about like what could have been there with a player like Sean Taylor. But really pleased to see that they're doing this. I think, like I just kind of mentioned, I think this is kind of maybe a part two, take two at a kind of way to honor Sean Taylor and his legacy, when the first time around was largely muffled and poorly executed, to say the least.
It was an absolute disgrace, and I don't know if you remember the entire thing. So it was completely put together, and I believe it was around the same time that all the investigations were starting to come out around the
That's correct.
Redskins organization.
Hmm.
And it really was horrible. And I don't know if you remember, but there was a game that year against the Chiefs, and I'm a fan of Patrick Mahomes' play style. As a human being, I feel a lot of complicated emotions towards him. But his brother, actually, I can perfectly say this and feel no guilt towards it. Jackson Mahomes is a terrible person. He, during his time at the Commanders, formerly football team at that time, was recorded doing a TikTok dance on Sean Taylor's memorial on the field. And as a person who has studied history, I have a strong reverence for it, and I have a respect for the past, and I especially have respect for the past of this organization. And I believe that that is a despicable action by that individual. I hope that this really cements that the Commanders as a franchise are serious towards honoring the legacy and the image of Sean Taylor as a person who grew up in such a tough community and obviously had tried to avoid for so long the gang affiliations and other problems that surrounded his neighborhood. He truly was a light of inspiration for all of us. Was a man who had attempted to even learn Spanish at one point to be able to communicate with his wife and young daughter in their own language that she was learning at the time. And just a great guy, and I really hope that this makes everything right internally. And as a fan, I really hope that people recognize the light that he was as a human being.
Absolutely. Everybody in Washington loves Sean Taylor. I used to have his jersey when I was a wee lad. I have a white away Redskins Sean Taylor jersey to this day that I wear on game days. So it's really great to see that they're still honoring his legacy. And of course, it was very botched execution last time. The only concern that I have is that they are erecting this new statue at FedEx Field, which, you know, I think most fans are hoping that they don't have to keep going to games at FedEx Field in the foreseeable future. So hopefully, it's going to be a permanent installation, but maybe if we get, a new home down the line, they can bring that statue with them.
Yeah, thankfully, I would hope that they'd be able to move that with them, a piece of kind of architecture that holds such a meeting. We'd hope that they'd be able to bring that with them to a new stadium, and I imagine they will be able to do that when the time does come. But yeah, Clark and I were actually at the game right after Sean Taylor's death. We still have those 21 towels that they were handing out. So I totally agree with what you fellas are saying. Really looking forward to having this maybe be a positive note to close out, a wonderful legacy. You all, I remember where I was when I heard the news that he had been shot and was in the hospital. It was one of those things that you kind of never forget, kind of where you are, what you were doing at the time, right? So, super pleased that they're kind of taking another stab at making this right.
Yeah, and I'm happy that they're just, resolved towards, the legacy of Sean Taylor being a big part of this team, because I think as a fan, we can all agree that, especially for our generation, Sean Taylor was a big part of our fandom. And his loss is so big to our fandom because we will continually talk about how great he was. Now, moving on from generational talent to another generational talent, Chase Young being back, on a happier note, does create an interesting debate that I think we should have on the podcast, which is, who do you believe the best defensive lineman on the team is? Now, I'm speaking, of course, about defensive tackles and defensive ends. The names which you might be able to throw out are Deron Payne, Jonathan Allen. Chase Young is obviously in the conversation. Montez Sweat is making a good case for himself. So I'm curious as to how you guys would answer this question.
Well, obviously, I'm gonna go ahead and say David Bada, but just to like make things interesting, I guess I can also talk about a guy, Jonathan Allen. Obviously, he's having another great Pro Bowl level year. He kind of had a breakout season last year, earning his first Pro Bowl nod. It's very easy to say Jonathan Allen. I know it's not maybe the most interesting take, but I think it's the correct one. He's a guy that demands respect around the league, and he's also just probably, I would say, he's the vocal leader of that defense as well. In addition to Chase Young, who is, in his absence, Jonathan Allen is really proven to be a great leader on the field, on and off the field. So I think that, if you take him out, like his impact goes far beyond the stat sheet and the things that he's able to do. So I would say that Jonathan Allen would be my answer.
Yeah, I mean, behind David Bada and FAO Bada, you'll definitely have to give the nod to Allen when it comes to the most well-rounded kind of player on this team, not only, in being a monster on the field, but also a leader, in the locker room and off the field, and a guy that I know the coaching staff relies very heavily on to kind of get their messaging through to the team. So he's an integral part of this team. I don't, I'll knock on wood now, but I honestly think that Jonathan Allen's a guy that you see play his full career here in Washington. That said, I think Deron Payne is making a really good case for himself as well. I mean, he has six and a half sacks, I believe, on the season so far. I think that's a career high for him, and I know it's at least a career high for him for this far through a season, if not already a career high in terms of sack. And I think his production has just been off the chart. I think we've seen a level of play that we haven't even seen before out of Deron Payne, and this is coming from perspective going into this season where he already is widely considered one of our best players on that defensive side of the ball. So I think Deron Payne, you could make an argument that he's been playing some of the best ball of his life and some of the best ball out of any players on this team as well. So can't definitely cannot forget about Deron Payne. I really hope there's a way that we can keep him on this football team moving forward. I think name a better defensive tackle duo better than Allen and Payne in the league right now, because I certainly can't.
You want to hear a pretty scary stat about Deron Payne that I did not even realize? The guy is only 25 years old. He seems like he's been on the team for what? This is his fourth or fifth season. He's only 25 years old, and he's playing it just. He seems to really be hitting his stride. He was already good in years past, but again, there really does need to be a way we can bring him back. Googling his name, NBC Sports, and there's articles saying, what is the path to bringing him back in 2023? Because I think it's a question that we're all certainly asking now. And to begin the year, I wasn't sure whether or not we would bring him back or should bring him back, but I don't think it's a question now.
Well, there is a fella sitting on the bench right now who takes up a large majority of our cap space currently. And if we were to release him at the end of the season, we would save let's just say a lot of room in cap space as well. So perhaps that's one avenue to finding a way to make it work.
Yeah, and I think you all bring up great points about Jonathan Allen and Deron Payne, obviously. I mean, David Bada and F.A. Bada, I realize that you two are joking when you say that. However, they are great players. But I would offer to you that Chase Young is secretly the best player on this defensive line. I mean, I think we forget that he was the number 2 overall pick at one point, and he was consensus the greatest player defensively in that draft at the time. And he's really paid off for us when he's been on the field. Now, obviously, you talk about how he wasn't producing before he got injured, and that's definitely something you got to worry about. But when the team is humming like this, and then you have Chase Young stepping onto the field, I mean, I think there's a chance that there's 6 games left. I think there's a chance he gets 7 sacks before the end of the season if he really just sort of, plugs in and plays exactly like the rest of the defensive line. And you talk about re-signing Deron Payne. Well, if we re-sign Deron Payne, that would make holding on to Chase Young a hell of a lot harder in the future. And I think that's a guy, DeMatha kid, a kid that really grew up around the area and I think has a pride for being in the same place for a lot of his life. I think if we don't hold on to him, that would be a bigger loss than Deron Payne.
It's certainly something to talk about. He's definitely one of the more marketable players that this team has. And when you have a rebrand and you're looking to get rid of, kind of the things that have plagued you in the past with this franchise, having a guy like that's a hometown kid that could really resonate with the fan base. And, he certainly is a fan favorite when he's played. But, he was good his rookie year. Last year, yes, he got injured, but up until that point, I believe he only had a sack and a half through a good half or a little bit more than half of the season. So we've seen what this guy is capable of. Unfortunately, last year he wasn't playing particularly well while he was healthy. So I really would be looking forward to seeing him kind of show us again why he's worthy of being considered this franchise player.
Yeah, I love Chase Young, and I mean, who doesn't, right? He's a very likable guy. I mean, I don't think I've seen a guy who's been injured the entire season get as much camera time as he has. I mean, a guy that hasn't even set foot on the field, and yet he's still one of the guys that the media goes to talk to or shows sitting on the side of the field or talks about, in between plays or post pregame, whatever. The guy still has the attention of fans, of media, the players on his own team. It's very obvious he's continued to be a leader even in his absence on the field. So I think that speaks volumes to the kind of player he is. But I would argue that there needs to be some evidence of production and ability to come back and bounce back after this injury to be able to name him, the best player on this defensive front for sure. I think if even if you just look at the guys that we have on the edge, I think Montez Sweat has put together, a much better kind of career resume so far and has proven to be a menace so far this season. I'm not sure on his total sack count for this season so far yet, but I know it's up there, if not the highest on the team. And he's continued to make problems for defenses and clearly, is more durable and consistent, at least so far in their 2 careers. I know he missed a little bit of time end of last year's towards the end of the season there. Montez did, but really, really pleased with the play out of him. But yes, to the point of Chase Young, really hope that he can come back this Sunday, make an impact, look like his old self from his first year in the league. And wow, this defense, if that's the case, this defense is going to, be taken to yet another, level that I just can't wait to see.
Montez Sweat currently has 6 sacks on the season, which is on pace for his best season thus far in his career. And also I want to so yeah, he's been looking good. And I do want to reiterate, I'm not a Chase Young hater at all. I love Chase Young. I have a Chase Young jersey. I have
not at all.
a pair of socks with the guy's face on it, for crying out loud. So I do love Chase Young, and I really think that he can become this player. But I would certainly like to see him come back in full swing.
All great points, guys, and I think that'll do it for us here on the Going Commando podcast for this week. I am your host, Tom. My co-hosts, Clark and Chris, thank you for listening. And as always, HTTR and HTTC.